say that they were asked to falsify vote totals on August 9th, and that they were signing documents with falsified results, and that they were asked to sign summary documents with key portions of those summary documents left blank so as to disguise voter fraud, basically saying that they were signing these before voting would have been completed, and it was just fabricated, effectively. This comes as again, protests have broken out in recent weeks, potentially seriously imperiling the Lukashenko government. We'll see where this goes. Also comes as the EU has started to get involved, saying that they don't recognize those election results. We'll see where this goes. Again, there's a major flashpoints in a couple parts of Europe right now. Greece and Turkey, we were talking about yesterday. We can come back to that stuff later. Also, over a little bit further to the southeast in Lebanon, protesters in Beirut tried to storm Lebanon's parliament. This came on the same day that the country celebrated the passage of 100 years since the declaration of Greater Lebanon by French mandate authorities. And these protests, the raiding of parliament, coincided with the visit of Emmanuel Macron. He came to the country just a few weeks after a massive suspicious explosion gutted the capital's port. You've all heard about this, of course. It killed hundreds of people, injured thousands, and it knocked the government out of power. It didn't just knock people out of their homes, it also forced the government out of the position of governing. Things are in major upset right now over there. And protesters, again, just tried to storm the parliament there. So my point is, everything is breaking down. I don't know. I've never been there. I'd love to go, but maybe not right now. In our next headline, last but not least, airline pilots landing at LAX had a close interaction with a, quote, guy in a jetpack. That's what the pilots said to air traffic control. Pilots said they reportedly saw him flying about 300 yards off their wing, so a little bit less than 1,000 feet away from their wing. He was flying at jet speeds, or they were, I don't know the gender, I suppose, flying at jet speeds at about 3,000 feet elevation. And again, to that point, the gender, the identity of the person is unknown. My personal recommendation here is you shouldn't try this at home or, for that matter, at the airport. And with that, we're done. Those are fault lines. Those are headlines. This is Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Okay, and we're back. Yeah, man, maybe rhyming the words there on that outro. I should just be very clear about what order they come in, because you don't want to mix those up. Anyway, we're taking calls 202-521-1320, 202-521-1320. I would love a jetpack. I've wanted a jetpack for a long time, even if you only got to fly it once. If that flight were long enough, it might be worth it. I know this is not the most important thing we could be talking about today, but it's literally the top of mind.
Skydiving was a lot of fun. Yeah, skydiving was a lot of fun. So yeah, I could see it.
I'd love to do that. I wanted to get a guest when I was a producer on the show. It was very personal, but I talked about this. A guest to talk about paramotoring, which is this thing where you like strap a fan on your back and you have a paraglider overhead. Anyway, again, far from the most important, timely, or topical issue. What are you gonna get into?
The conversation with Medea before my computer cut off on me. I was going to ask her, why does the left accept the responsibility of getting a Democrat elected as opposed to having that Democrat come get your vote? And I don't think, I really honestly don't think the left entirely grapples with and internalizes what it means when the pressure point is found. Meaning, if your society, any random society, has a representative government, and a side of that basically says, it is my responsibility to get this candidate in office, as opposed to, it is the responsibility of the candidate to come get my vote in order to get in office. It's an inversion of any notion of democracy or any notion of a representative government. I mean, for God's sake, how can it be a representative government if nearly 80% of people are voting for the guy, not because of what the guy's going to do? That's not a representative at all. That's the opposite. I'm saying whatever that pressure point that you think is there, when you say, okay, Trump bad, all right, I don't care what the Democrat is, I don't care what that Democrat does, I'm going to get him in office. The principle has been established. You've set the precedent. The next Republican that comes up, Tom Cotton, Ted Cruz, they're going to be monsters. And what are you going to say then when Hillary Clinton comes up again and says, all right, here's my chance? And you're going to have people out on the left saying, it is now again my responsibility to get this random Democrat in office, as opposed to having that random Democrat represent my interest to get my vote. The problem is you create a precedent where that candidate is unaccountable. There is no leverage. How can there be leverage when you're terrified? You're not voting for who that guy is. Meaning there is no leverage in that process. You have zero leverage. Where's your leverage? What are you going to do? You're going to yell at him when Ted Cruz is your next opponent, another monster, and you're going to come to the same conclusion? This is what I must bear. I must make this vote. I'm making the point that whatever that principle is, it is cowardly. And that cowardly, and I'm not talking about Medea. She doesn't do this. She's not a reflexive voter in that way. But there are a lot of Democrats that are, and that call themselves progressives and so forth, but they would reflexively vote for whatever Democrat. The moment that the precedent is found and the precedent is set, that precedent could go back to over and over and over and over and over again. Why wouldn't they not? Think back for a moment to the 2016 election. Donald Trump was the Pied Piper candidate because they thought there is no way anybody will vote for him, and the public will be so terrified of him that it doesn't matter my flaws. It doesn't matter. This guy's a monster. You pick the monster. You pick the person who's not a monster. Hillary Clinton got a shot of reality when the public said, we're done. And just like the gentleman in the first segment, Smalls, walked off the picket line and left, they said, we're done, and they did the same. I'm making the point that if any point, at any time, your country accepts the premise, whatever that country is, that it is your job to get somebody elected because you're terrified of the monster in the other party, and you eliminate all accountability and all responsibility for the policies that the person is accepting, you've inverted your politics. Think of the one concentration camp less argument. Think of that argument. A guy says, I, Republican, I'm going to build 10 concentration camps. The Democrat says, I'm going to build 8. 4 years later, that Democrat says, I'm only going to build 1 concentration camp less. But now, that other guy's building 20. You've moved further and further under this notion of less harm while you are creating more harm. I'm saying it is not pragmatic. You are instantiating the problems that are in your society, whether that's in Wisconsin, whether that's in pick any particular place around this United States where you have entrenched poverty and violence. You're incentivizing that because you don't do anything about that under this notion of pragmatism. I'm saying it's not pragmatic at all when you're looking at it over the course of history and time, not to mention your only relevance in the process. We have callers. I'm sorry. Ingrid from D.C. All right, Ingrid, what are you going to say? What am I saying wrong now? What are you going to do to take the piss out of me today? Welcome to the show, Ingrid. I'm teasing.
Am I going to have time before the break?
Yes, you will. You have time.
And if you don't, we'll hold you.
Yeah, if we don't, we'll let you come back over.
Could you just hold me?
We can hold you. That's fine. Let's take a break now then.
We're going to go into a break.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll be right back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a second with Ingrid from D.C.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Man, we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and the phone 202-521-1320. But without further ado, let's get straight back to Ingrid. Ingrid, what's going on?
Well, Jamarl did a pretty good job with Medea. Thank you, Jamarl. I just wanted to add to his list of Obama's foreign adventures. It was under Obama that he began the pivot to China to take control of the shipping lanes. This was a fire under China to get on with their Belt and Road project to have overland routes of trade. The most important thing Jamarl left out was Ukraine. Biden was actually overseeing the color revolution, the Maidan coup in Ukraine.
So
he was the one that gave the final approval to the government that Victoria Nuland had picked out. And I don't see any way in the world I could bring myself to vote for Biden under any circumstances. Now, you had yesterday on a caller who was talking about other shows, and I may be conflating, but I think he talked about Amy Goodman and he talked about NPR. Amy's not actually on NPR. She's on Pacifica, but NPR this morning, they're terrible. They did a typical evasive action where they were talking about Facebook clamping down on supposed Russian bots. And they said, of course, Facebook still has right-wingers and QAnon, but they omitted saying anything about Antifa. Like they are in this either deny that they exist or downplay or ignore Antifa. And as far as Amy Goodman, she does some very good domestic stuff. She's very interesting. I have a lot of friends who just worship her. I can't listen to her ever since she was cheerleading for the no-fly zone and Obama's entry into Libya. And I'm very, very sorry to tell you that early on in this, so was Medea. She was an enabler of that unfortunate business.
That's interesting. That said, I didn't know about that. I mean, I want to go back just for a second to Ukraine. It's not just that he was, you're right, he's a very prominent person. Like to the point where he was referred to as the viceroy. I've heard him referred to as the viceroy, the sort of colonial commandant or whatever.
That's my nickname. That's my nickname.
That's
That's my nickname for him. I used to call him a viceroy. That's what he felt. That's what it came across as. When you were reading the stuff about Ukraine, it came across as Joe Biden was a viceroy. I mean, for God's sake, like when you are pushing people out of office in another government, when you have like money that you're hanging over their heads in order to compel their behavior, what else is there, right? Thank you, Ingrid.
Yeah, I wonder why Trump isn't. Trump seems to. I mean, he has a lot of stuff going on, so there's no real thing here. But he could be pushing back pretty damn hard. The impeachment was obviously about Ukraine, but also everybody who's been paying attention to politics knows the Hunter Biden connection in Ukraine, which Trump could use as a cudgel against Biden. I kind of wonder why he isn't. Maybe it's some reticence about the impeachment thing, but there's also. He knows about the chalupas. He knows the relationship between the DNC. He's mentioned that stuff before, I believe. Pretty darn sure, multiple times. Not pretty sure. I'm sure. I don't know why he's not doing that more. In any event, Ingrid, thank you for the call. I think we should go to more callers. We're still taking calls, by the way. 202-521-1320. Oh, actually, before we move on, just real quick note, Ingrid, you were mentioning Democracy Now! Is the program that the other caller had brought up. Specifically, that caller was talking about how they seemed darker, how they've been consistently negative, like gloomy.
Yeah.
It's just interesting to note. I just wanted to throw that back into the conversation. In any event, going to go to our next caller, 202-521-1320. Rod, calling in from Philly. Rod, you're on. What's going on?
Shane, I wanted to particularly kind of talk to you on my call because since March you've been reporting on the coronavirus, and I'm not criticizing. I'm just comparing and contrasting what's been reported. And a couple of days ago, the CDC's come out with a report and statistics showing that only 6% of deaths have been solely due to coronavirus, which I think equaled out to about 10,000 deaths or something like that. And I've been saying since March, since the word ventilator came out into the news, to the president's mouth and all these governors, we need more ventilators. Again, I'm a medical professional, 7-year ENT. I've been saying and still saying, and it's still proven because a lot of hospitals still have wings with people on ventilators, that if you really look at it, it's not the coronavirus that's killed people. We now know it's 6% that solely killed people just for the coronavirus without comorbidities. It's the ventilators that's called medical murder. When you put someone on a ventilator, you lower their percentage of livelihood to 50%. That's a coin toss.
Right.
People are still on ventilators.
Right. Just for one intro for the moment. I've been on a ventilator. It sucks. Yes, I agree with you. I don't think doctors are putting people on ventilators just because they want to. I think they put them on because they're in a medical necessity and they think that that's what they need to do so. And over the course of time, when they're starting to deal with the virus, they don't know what they're doing. They're trying, their best, and they're learning as they go. It's science. One catch though, whether it's that number doesn't matter. I don't think you realize how irrelevant that 60% number is. If you're looking at America and you take how many people have diabetes, how many people have prediabetes, how many people have issues that they don't know about, how many people have high blood, how many people have this, how many people have that, you're going to get a large segment of the population that if you walk home from where you work to your home, you're going to find, and you probably bump into 100 people that have some issue wrong with them. That doesn't matter. I don't think you realize how irrelevant it is. The fact that people are human beings. Those human beings have all sorts of things that they deal with. If I was walking home and I get ill, I could potentially kill everybody or many people that are in my facility, the clinic that I walk to, because I have one of those comorbidities. And I would wager to you that there are people in my family, people across the street from me, people in my neighborhood. That number is so tremendous in a country of 300 million that whether it's specific to 6% is irrelevant, just because you don't live in a world where people are separated in this way where they don't have other medical issues. But okay.
And effectively, another way of looking at this is that if 6% of the people who died didn't have comorbidities, and that means that you have 6 relatively healthy people. I mean, not 6% of people who died who are relatively healthy who died from coronavirus. That's not big, but from the very beginning, I guess I'm responding because you were talking about like our reporting, and specifically a lot of this was my reporting. I've been talking about this explicitly as like the coronavirus dude on the show when I was a producer. I was talking about that stuff for a long time. Anyway, from the very beginning, the whole thing, and just as everybody knows, this hits people with lowered immunity, people who are older, people who have COPD, people who are obese, etc., people who have had asthma or pneumonia in the past, people who have various conditions that would reduce your ability to fight off infections, to fight off inflammation, people who already have inflammatory issues, etc. Like different ways of cutting it, but that's sort of taken as granted. It's good to know that. So the 6% thing is good just for modeling stuff, but it doesn't contradict anything to say that only 6% of the people who died didn't have comorbidities. Like the whole point is that this hits people really hard when they have those comorbidities. It's multiplicative. It seems like that. Where if you're obese and you have COPD and you've had pneumonia, and you get this, you should just not get this. I'm going to put it that way. That's thing one. You know what? There is a thing too, but we've got 3 other callers. Rod from Philly, thank you for the call. I always like to push back. Lou from Missouri. Lou calling in. What's going on?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely. You're on. What's going on, Lou?
Okay, so I had just a few things. One, I was wondering why it was that no one really covered the People's Convention. I mean, I know it was mentioned on like the Hill and TYT mentioned it, but they didn't actually cover it. But they devoted days worth of coverage to those crap fests that we saw with the RNC and DNC respectively. I also had a comment about what Medea Benjamin had to say about if we don't get real changes because of the lack of the strength of our grassroots movements. That is incredibly condescending and revisionist history at best. As far as the Kenosha thing, it's just a complete...
Wait. Say that one more time. I'm sorry. Say that last part one more time. You said if we don't get real change, it's because of... I didn't hear the last point. I apologize.
I believe she said that, or something to the effect that if we don't get real change, it's because of the lack of strength of our grassroots movement. And I find it to be kind of funny because there hasn't been any lack of grassroots movement over the last 40 to 50 years. It's just that the DNC and the RNC have been in lockstep with saying screw you to grassroots movement collectively.
Exactly.
For the last half century, not longer.
Yeah, exactly. I disagree with her too on that one. I think that stuff is irrelevant at this point, right? Because look, at the moment that you can get a grassroots movement to say, okay, here are our demands. That's what they say. And the party says, so what? Go vote for the Republican. And they say, we can't do that. We'll vote for you. At that point, why do you have to listen to them? I mean, it's one thing if the grassroots movement is challenging them in the sense of winning a primary, for example. That's one thing. It's another thing if you get past the primary. At that point, either the grassroots movement, they have a choice. Do we stop them from getting elected, or do we fall in line? And for the last 40 years, it's been fall in line. And so I agree with you. It's like you always have the bad guy, whichever party you're in, where you could say, well, look, you accept us or you accept that other guy. That guy's a monster, right? Yeah, as long as you accept the premise that the guy's a monster, then it almost makes you irrelevant. I agree with you. Is there anything else? I'm sorry.
Okay, so the other side here, and we should go to. We've got two more callers at least. Yeah, so really, I'm going to skip what I had to say and just go straight to him. We've got Jill calling in from Chicago. Jill, you're on. What's going on?
Hi, how are you guys?
We're doing all right.
Hey, how's it going? What's on your mind?
I was calling about something Jamarl has mentioned a couple times, and I just wanted to kind of explain. He was talking about the disparity in unemployment in Kenosha, and it's really interesting to look at these communities. I'm from Chicago, and so what you're looking at, it's really good to understand what that is. So there used to be, in Kenosha, a small farming town. There was dairy farms, cheese, where they made cheese and so forth. But there was also a couple small plants where they manufactured small parts for the auto industry that would be put on boats, dragged across, the Great Lakes, and then delivered to Detroit. Okay. So what you're looking at is the gutting of the Midwest,
That's true. That's very interesting.
All these jobs left. So steel was made in Rockford, Illinois. It was put on trains to go up to Kenosha. There was a couple small plants that could turn on a dime for the auto industry, make small parts, fans. They also did small engines for Caterpillar for like lawnmowers and jet skis and stuff like that, because Wisconsin is also a very recreational state of camping, jet skiing, lawnmowers, all kind of stuff like that. So those were all like motorized plants that built stuff. Okay. So when we look at those statistics, I mean, this is what we have done to our own citizens. We took their jobs. We didn't, when they moved those factories, there was no strategy to provide them with anything. The other thing I'm going to really quickly point out is Cabrini Green. Okay, Cabrini Green residents were moved all over. Okay, Chicago won't tell us where they're relocating them. A bunch of them went out to Rockford. They won't tell us. I really think that neighborhood that Jacob was from, that's government housing. Okay, and I really think those are the grandchildren. Those are the grandchildren of the people who worked at the factories up there and are relocated from Cabrini Green. You can't just put.
Oh, wait. We're running out of time. Oh, God, I love this call. Can we get you to call back?
Yeah, Jill.
In fact, we may even want you to call just for like 15 minutes to explain exactly what you're explaining, because I think it's vastly important for people to get the conditions that people live in those areas that produce those outcomes. And for that matter, the policies that have produced that de-gutting, like NAFTA, or for that matter, TPP, which would be worse that Joe Biden wants to implement. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
What do we want? News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune in to Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. I just wanted to come in. We're bringing in Kim Iverson in a second here. I just wanted to thank, before we get to Kim, I just wanted to thank Jill from Wisconsin, from Chicago, for calling and talking to us about Kenosha, Wisconsin, the history there with deindustrialization, how that affected the economy, and how Jacob Blake may be coming from a family. I don't know. It's an interesting topic. We'll have her back on.
Please tell her to call back or email us.
Please.
My email.
Yeah, Jill from Chicago. If you ShaneStranahan@gmail.com is my email. And you can also send it to faultlinesradio@gmail.com. Or for our producer, Raheem, you can also send it to Raheem the producer, RAHIMTHA producer @gmail.com, RaheemTheProducer.com, RaheemTheProducer@gmail.com. In any event, just wanted to thank Jill for that call. We've got Kim Iverson. Kim, thank you for joining us.
Hi guys. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Morning. Thank you so much for being with us. All right, Kim, independent journalist and the host of the Kim Iverson Show on YouTube. Pretty easy to check out there. You can go over to YouTube, check out youtube.com/Kim Iverson. And that's that. Anyway, Kim, thank you so much for joining us. We're talking about the People's Party convention happening this weekend. Also, Biden versus Trump, I suppose. The issue of voter shaming, maybe. There's just all of this continuum of issues related to the election. But how is the People's Party convention for you this weekend? What'd you think?
Well, it was really long, so I was only able to watch about an hour of it. I think I've talked to Nick Brana before. He's the guy that's leading the People's Party movement. And I think it's a great place for the People's Party. Seems to be a great place for disenfranchised progressives from the Democratic Party who would traditionally vote along Democratic lines. Many of them do not consider themselves Democrats, but still, it's a great place for disenfranchised former Bernie Sanders progressives to get together and continue to air out their grievances. But that's pretty much the only way, that's pretty much what I think it will ultimately result in. The stated goal of the People's Party is to create a major third-party option that truly represents the people, and which I think is a really great stated goal. But the problem was, when I watched the convention, I was actually quite disappointed because I did not feel that they were headed in a direction that would truly result in a major third-party option. Instead, what I saw was an option that looks like it would, at best, be able to grow large enough to replace the Green Party as the major third-party option for Democrats. That would act as more of a spoiler, or that would act as maybe also, at best case, a caucus that would potentially push Democrats to the left. But as far as seeing it as a major third-party option, I was really disappointed to watch the convention and see that I just didn't hear the necessary words and the necessary uniting tone that would actually create a major third-party option in the United States.
Be specific. I'm trying to understand what you mean. Like what do you think would have been necessary? Like, what would have been the words, or what would you think have been the point of view, maybe even the organization that would have been necessary for this to be considered legitimately in the direction of a third party?
Of a major third party.
Third party, right.
Right. Yeah. So mostly, I mean, they've shifted their tone and their language to be almost identical to the Bernie Sanders 2020 campaign.
Right.
So when I tuned in for the hour I heard, there was I know I tuned into an hour that was probably more hyper focused on this, more of the social activism that we're seeing a lot in the news, and that we've seen a lot of discussion about in Bernie Sanders 2020 campaign. So a lot of talk about racism and bigotry, and that we've got to get rid of hyper policing. There was like a little slight tone towards defund the police from one of the speakers that I heard. There's just still all of that very left. I would say, very rhetoric that would very much turn off anyone who does not associate with the Bernie Sanders 2020, anybody who does not associate with BLM or associate with the defund the police movement, anybody who comes more from the right, the populists that are feeling disenfranchised from the right would absolutely be turned off by this language and say, never mind.
Yeah, I can agree with that in parts. I accept that. I mean, I was part of the People's thing. I did, I think, a 5-minute segment. I like the idea. And I like the notion of, there needs to be something else. I 1,000% agree. And in fact, I would think a lot of people, the majority of the country, would probably say, there needs to be something else. Now, whether they would vote for it, well, they wouldn't vote for it unless they thought they could viably win. So, fair point. I thought that a better idea might have been to stand under policy alone. Because at that point, you're not associating with the party. In fact, if you're standing under this notion of, let's say, Medicare for all, let's say elimination of student debt, let's say expansion of Social Security, whatever the policies are, if you have a very tip of the spear approach, then you may have people from the right that says, you know what, I agree with that. You may get people from the right that says, look, I had a kid that was sick. I don't want to deal with that. Fair enough. I agree with that. Even though that right would never, in any imagination, associate with some of the language that might have come out in the People's Campaign platform. So I think I can agree with that argument. I think that's a fair criticism of it. What do you think about the policy argument, though? Like, under the notion of, okay, we're under the banner of this, and this. That's all. That's where we are. What about that as a strategy of using politics and basically making the argument of, like, look, whoever accepts these policies gets our vote. Flat fact, period. And you go home. Does that in any way try to pressure or move a party? Or is that, even that, will get this notion of, all right, we're going to test that to see if they're legitimate about the fact that takes place. Meaning, we're willing to tank it. Either party in this situation, whether this is coming from the left or from the right.
I definitely think that if there's going to be a major third party that's going to draw enough people from both the Democrats and the Republican voting base in order to really make a dent, it absolutely has to focus on policy. The question is, which policy?
Right.
So, that's where it gets a little bit tricky, because though there is a lot of agreement actually between people, your average everyday American voting on a Republican ticket typically, or voting for a Democratic ticket, there's a lot of agreement and consensus. But it does have to be in moderation. It has to be sort of a centrist. But I hesitate to use that word, because that word has a negative connotation. When people think centrist, they think of what we've already got in government right now. That's not what I'm saying. What we have in government right now is just right-wing politics, something that's more, and what we have is, they're run by corporations.
Right. They're
all bought off. It's a very, very corrupt system. So centrism in government is a bit different than the centrism I'm talking about. In fact, centrist, between, a true centrist but populist People's Party that really does represent people from the left and the right, would actually be still quite radical in comparison to what we've got going on in our government, right?
I've made that argument so many times. Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
but it would still have to be somewhat centrist, in that it couldn't go too far in any one direction. And for example, you've got a lot of populists coming out of sort of a libertarian viewpoint. So that's a viewpoint that they don't want really any government. They don't really want any government intervention. And they're the ones that would be more likely to push back on things like Medicare for all or free college tuition. But they do get on board with quite a bit of that, much more than the Republican Party or even the Democratic Party at this point. When you talk to one of these this sort of populist libertarian, they do say that they want the cost of they want the cost of education drastically reduced. They might not go as far as free. So this is what I'm talking about. They don't go as far as saying it should be free, but they get really darn close. So you could create policies that or at least use language for the policies that really appeal to their sensibilities as well. So it couldn't just appeal to left, what traditionally is coming out of the true left of the Democratic Party. It would have to have language that is totally different. And that's going to be really difficult to do, to get people to shift the way they talk. But you don't really need to get the people themselves to shift the way they talk. You just need the leadership that's organizing the party to be very careful in their word selection. But there's a lot of consensus coming from both. But the biggest one though, and really a party could just be built on a platform of just get money out of politics. We can't even begin to have these conversations of ideology of what's really truly best when we've got our government is Congress in particular is completely bought out. I mean, it is alarmingly corrupt.
Kim, I agree with you. If we could get these battered wife lefties to stop giving all of their attention to a party that doesn't care about them, that thinks they're irrelevant, that kicks them when they wake up in the morning and punches them when they go to bed at night, and they're still there. Because honestly, of everybody in the political space, it is the left that basically makes the argument, we disagree with this. Like lefties, progressives, they fundamentally disagree with this notion of money being in politics. And I think at some point, lefties, right-wingers are too. But so does the country. But I'm saying, but the part in the political space, it's the left. And they accept it.
That's basically indefensible.
Yeah.
The opposite. I don't know who would oppose that. I mean, that's a very difficult position to push back against. You'd have to get into a bunch of nuance, I think. And obviously, if you do, then you've lost pretty much everybody who's paying attention. For the
and
most
yet
part,
the policy stays.
Denominator thing.
Yeah, and yet it stays.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of my point about the representative government stuff.
There's a lot of room there.
Yeah. I mean, but I think
Kim,
you can make that argument. I'm sorry, Shane. Go ahead.
Pardon. No, I had two questions. We're only going to have time for one of them, so we're going to have to do it after the break. Kim, thanks again for joining us. Quick question. When you came in earlier, you're talking about the People's Party as a potential, you used the word spoiler, but as an alternative to the Green Party for the Democrats on the left, basically a viable alternative that can actually capture votes and maybe serve as an alternative. And then at the same time, there's the potential there, as you're getting into it, if you have a sort of centrist political party or a couple of centrist political parties, there's the potential for an actual replacement, trying to actually outmode and outdo the Republicans and the Democrats as such, as parties. In our minute before we go out, do you see that as a possibility, or is that too optimistic?
No, it's a complete possibility. If there could be the right leadership forming a third party together, it would have to have big voices, bold voices, but it is absolutely possible. Teddy Roosevelt attempted it with the Bull Moose Party back when he was running against Woodrow Wilson and Taft, and he came really close, except he only pulled, unfortunately, from one side of the aisle. So it was a mistake, but that was a very big name that came forward that actually did gain enough votes, more votes than the Republican Party themselves. He gained more votes than the establishment, but not enough. Unfortunately, still it acted as a spoiler and split the ticket. But it is possible to do. It just has to be done with the right leadership, with the right language, and it has to be focused on being very uniting and not divisive at all.
I want to come back on that. You were talking about issues of centrism, what could unite instead of divide us. We're going to be back in a second with Kim Iverson, host of the Kim Iverson Show on YouTube. Again, back in a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines. Catch all the breaking global, political, and economic news as it happens. Sputnik brings an all-star lineup with expert opinion from some of the biggest names in the news today. Noam Chomsky.
Turkey, U.S. ally, their main goal is to attack the Kurds, the one ground force opposing ISIS. And there have been a kind of a funnel for support of ISIS, not officially, but in practice.
Peter Sunde, co-founder of the Pirate Bay.
We don't have any sort of democratic control over the internet. And I think that we're very naive when we think that the internet itself is intrinsically good. It's not. It's just a very neutral technology that is being used for good things, but more and more being used for evil things.
Icelandic Foreign Minister Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson.
Increased activities in the Keflavik airbase, and that has to do with more activities from the Russian Northern Fleet in the ocean around Iceland, and also, of course, these usual flights of the bombers.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
We're the ones that destroyed the government of Libya. We're the ones that, in a pipeline dispute, that helped destroy the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We're the ones who invaded Iraq.
Former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry.
The hostile relationship between the United States and Russia today is dangerous for both countries, not because either country would actually want to start a military conflict, but because there's always a danger of blundering.
Sputnik talks to the brightest minds in politics and current affairs to find out what's really happening. Tune in. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Iverson. We're joined by Kim Iverson for this segment. We're continuing our conversation. In the last, we're talking about the People's Party and a viable alternative for politics in the U.S. But before we get back into it, for those listening, Kim Iverson, independent journalist, and she's the host of the Kim Iverson Show on YouTube. Kim, thanks again for being with us. We're talking about an alternative party here. I think fundamentally you need to sort of frame the issues, and where my mind goes is, where are we on this sort of, if we're going to be as you know, if we're going to use the sort of trivial, simple, overly simplified scale that we use on our national political level, if we're going to compare things just on the left and the right, the single dimension. I've heard people come on this show from the left saying that they think that the Democrats have been moving further and further to the right over the years. And I've heard people, not so many on the show, but I've heard plenty of conservatives in the Republican Party saying that they think that the Republicans have been moving further and further to the left over the years. So it seems like you have the sort of wings of each party seeing their parties as moving towards the other parties. Now, this could be a contradiction, or it could be something different. I'm curious, where do you think we are? Do you think we've moved left? Do you think we've